girls and boys, an assembled company. Welcome to the World Storytelling Cafe. And today, I won't say tonight because I don't know whereabouts in the world you're listening from or watching. Hello, Keith. And so tonight we have LLoyd Winder, who will regale us with stories, I hope.
And you can
she
say
might be
where
singing.
I come. You can say where I come from tonight because it's important.
So LLoyd Winder on the north side of the M25, on the South Mims turning. If you actually want to not spend all your money at the service station, turn off at the South Mims turning, where you will have a choice of the McDonald's, or you go to the next roundabout up and there's Sainsbury's and all sorts of things around there. So massive, and so because she's in this hub, in fact the centre of the world when I'm driving from west to east. So from the M25, LLoyd Winder, over to you. I might have to go.
You go, John, and we'll see you sometime.
I'll stay here now. I want to listen to your story.
Right. So today it is very important that we know about South Mims because I'm taking you to the service station. You come with me and we walk down the road. We walk down Greyhound Lane and to a place called The Wash. Now, The Wash wasn't a place where you hung out your washing. The Wash was a place where it was wet. It was wet and boggy. But you see, the other point of it was a major road coming out of London and going into Hertfordshire and around to St Albans or north. And if you kept going north, you get to the highest place between here and there, which is York, from Barnet. So you see, the Wash was a place where sometimes it could be dark, spooky, and miasmic. Nice word, miasmic. You know, it's that fog that can become a person. Now, if you've been around in 14, because I can't remember the exact date, you would have been standing on the other side of the road, M25, when they had the Battle of Barnet, in which there was a duke, all regaled in his beauty and his honour. You know, they also carried their honour on their fronts and their flags. And people were shocked when the duke sailed into the fog and then, on a mistake, turned round, came back and attacked his own side. Now, he had changed sides a couple of times, so they thought, oh, he's just changing sides yet again. No, it was that Wash. Now, move on a bit. Now we move on to about the 1690s. And here in South Mims, we have our very own, our very, very own highwayman. And this highwayman is called James Whitney. And that's the stories I will be telling you tonight. James, he was born up the road in Stevenage. And as a young man, he was apprenticed to a butcher. Now, we don't know much about his butchering skills, but he first appears when he's sent off to a market to buy a cow. He had specific orders to buy this enormous great bull that was up for sale. Well, he and his friend went down and they obviously had the money in their pockets. And the guy was just saying, no, I want so much more than that. You know, you've got 5 gold coins. I want at least 8. And this went on during the day. They went backwards and forwards. James and his friend trying to lower the price. Now, the owner of this beautiful animal had an inn, a pub. And so they followed him back to the pub, hopefully hoping that they could get the price lowered because the bull hadn't been sold. But he was a canny what's-it. He was not going to sell it for anything less than his desired rate. And at closing time, James and his friend were thrown out to wander home with the money in their pockets and bad words to come from the master. So they got round the back, and James said to his friend, "Let's just take it." "What?" said his friend. "Well, we know it's in the barn. Let's just take it." And so it was agreed. Now, James, he drew the short straw. He had to go inside. And out the back of this inn was a big barn, dark as dark can be. So in went James. He found a rail and he followed the rail along, not seeing anything, just feeling. He got to what he felt was the gate, and he went through the gate. And then he was feeling forwards, wasn't he? That terrible moment when you step away from something you can feel into the unknown. And he felt something warm and hairy. So he patted it, and trying to keep it quiet, he tickled it. And whatever was there wiggled back. So he thought, I'm doing good. So he tried to feel up towards, well, one had to be the head and one had to be the tail, didn't it? But he couldn't find the head. And suddenly, whatever was there suddenly found him. Because he was tickling something and it was tickling him back. And suddenly around him came two large, furry paws and heaved into it. It was a bear. Now, you see, in those days, dancing bears were all the rage. All the big fairs had a dancing bear. And Romford, on Fair Day, had a dancing bear. And he just happened to be put in that same barn. And James had been clasped by the bear. Now, bears might dance, but they were known to be vicious. And he tried not to move. And he just stayed there, stuck. Outside, his friend was wondering what was going on. How long does it take a man to get hold of a cow and bring it out? Even if it's a big, furry, hairy bull, it doesn't take that long. So he was going in. Jade, where are you? What's going on? No word. He finds that piece of wood. He gets up to the gate. He's saying, James, James, what's going on? And there's a muffled sound. There's a bear! So his friend, thinking, what am I going to do? Suddenly realises, distraction, distraction. He sees the water bucket. He lifts the water bucket and chucks it. And it has the desired effect. Bear drops James. James absolutely sodden. And the two men, well, young men, race out of that building. And that was really the end of James Whitney's career as a butcher. But you see, he had to move on in life. Butchering wasn't for him. So next we find him as the landlord of the George in Cheshunt. Now, at the time, an inn was a place where you could become prosperous, but it was a lot of hard work. And we've already found out that James liked things a bit easy. And also, James liked a good bit of what we would later call schmutter, good clothes, the elegance. I mean, it was not so for nothing that he was known as the dandy highwayman. And it was said that at this time in the George in Cheshunt, he developed a penchant for dressing well, for showing off. But he also developed a relationship with all the worst people in the area. And as he developed that relationship with the robbers, the highwaymen, the shifty lot, his business went from okay to less than okay to really not okay to, oh my goodness me. And soon he was bankrupt and he had little option. So he turned to his friends and he became a highwayman. Now, everybody's got to start at the bottom, and James had to start at the bottom like everybody else. And there is a lovely early tale of his highway trade. He was out on the road, just on the way into London, south of Chestnut. There he was in his dark hat, dark suit, ready with the mask, the gun, waiting for somebody to come down the pathway. A lone horseman comes. When you're starting out as a highwayman, it's good to have a lone one. And so there he was, out there in the middle of the pathway, gun up, and he shouts the immortal words. At this point, I need some help. What are the immortal words of the highwayman? What do you have to shout? With your gun, hat, mask, and you say...
Stand and deliver.
You do, you shout. Are you ready? After 3, 1, 2, 3, stand and deliver. That's what you shout. And that's what James shouted, as every highwayman in times from the beginning shouted. And the man coming up the road, quick as a flash, shouted, that's exactly what I was going to say. And they stood laughing at each other. And James said, oh, what have you surprised me? I'm glad I didn't shoot when you answered me back there. Whew. I'm new to this game, you know. And so a good chat. And then they parted company. Except that the other man didn't go far, round the corner. And James, not catching anybody else that night, turned up at the same inn. And as he went in, there was his opponent, regaling us audience with his tale. There was me on the pathway riding up, and this man steps out, and quick as a flash I come up with, I was just going to shout the same to you. And they shouted the immortal words at each other. And what were those immortal words? They were stand and deliver. Exactly. Well, said the guy in the pub, and it was so funny because, of course, I wasn't going to do it at all. I persuaded him. And suddenly, instead of my purse being nicked, and it was a good purse, that, oh no, I'm back here safe and sound. And on he went. How the man had been a wimp. How he'd been shaking so much that his gun was wobbling. And James listened to it all. He learnt a good lesson that day. And he learnt an even better one that night. Because the man, you see, so full of courage and so bolstered by his own stories, he turned round and set off back home, only to be followed by James. And this time when James came out from behind the bush with his dark hat, his mask and his gun raised, and said the immortal words, stand and deliver, whatever that man had said, he wouldn't have believed him. And that tidy little purse ended up as his tidy little purse. And that was one of the very first instances that James remembered in his history of highway robbery. But he didn't remain that innocent, almost fragile highwayman for long. Soon he was commanding a troop You see, there was something about him, something about his manners that made people follow him. And soon he had a small army who would ride out with him. It is said that he could call on between 30 and 80 men at one time, which becomes important when the Duke of Marlborough, yes, him himself, becomes involved. This is a wonderful tale. You see, the Duke of Marlborough, well, he's married to the Duchess of Marlborough, who happened to be Sarah Churchill, who happened to be the favourite of Queen Anne, if you've ever seen the film or know anything about it. Anyway, she was an amazing woman. And they had an estate in St Albans. Remember? You come from Barnet, you come down round the Wash, that dark and miasmic, wet, damp, foggy, misty zone. The place where the service station is, of course. And it was exactly right for a hold-up or another stoppage. Well, the Duke of Marlborough was coming out of London with a casket of money. I mean, literally a casket of money. He had 40 dragoon guards with him. So everybody would have known that there was the Duke with this heavily armoured carriage coming along the road from Barnet through the Wash. And literally, I love this bit, because if I could run out my front door, turn left and left again, I would see the road that the Duke of Marlborough galloped down with his horses, because that's the road they took to St Albans. Except the captain and his guards were ready. This was a classic. The Wash was dark, but as you come out the other side, there's South Mimms, bigger than Potter's Bar is now. So many inns. You had to get through to the other side. So James actually decided not to catch them out in the Wash, but to wait till they were the far side of South Mimms, on the road. Go down the road a bit, and there's a place where it dips. Oh, a lovely place for a surprise attack. Raised either side, dip in the road, you can imagine. At this point, the road gets narrow. What had been a carriage surrounded by horses would suddenly be a carriage with horses behind and in front. James Whitney now was almost like a military campaigner. He knew what to do. He knew how to set out his men. They'd watched them come through the Wash. There'd been messengers who sent up the message that they were on their way. There they were, waiting to swoop down. So the Duke of Marlborough, in all his finery, with his men, feeling safe and comfortable. The Wash was the difficult place. The Wash was where it had happened. But no. Just outside the village, there the horde swooped down, and there was a pitched battle. And when we think battles are wars, but this was a pitched battle. Can you imagine? 60 highwaymen, 40 dragoons. Now, between 10 and 20 of the highwaymen were killed. 8 to 10 of the dragoons were killed. It was a bloody battle. Neither side won and neither side lost. James Whitney, now called Captain Whitney, got away with 500 guineas. A fair package, I think. But the Duke of Marlborough retained enough to get him the carriage and some of the money to his estates in St Albans. Imagine the hue and cry around these roads. after that. Here is the Duke of Marlborough. He is the hero of Sedgemoor. He is the hero of battles in Europe. He will have Blenheim Palace in the future paid for by the government. That's you and me's taxes if you live here. Phew. He was a hero of his time. And there was the highwayman, you know, ex-publican from Cheshunt, used to be apprentice butcher, routing him on our road. And they didn't catch him. That's the best bit. They didn't catch him because there were so many robbers around at the time. And that is the story of how Captain James Whitney survived and defeated the Duke of Marlborough. Whoa. Now we remember that we said James liked a little bit of gold and gilt. And in between all these battles and all the fighting in this area, because he knew these roads really well, he would go into the city of London. I mean, he had a wife in Cheshunt, but it said he had a lady friend in the city of London, and he was well known in some of the interesting houses down there. We won't say more about it. But he was also a talker, a chatter. And there he was in London one day. He'd just been down to get a new coat. He wanted it with a bit of silk on the collar. You know, a lot of his clothes had to be dark, but that doesn't mean they can't be smart, well fitted and unique. So he got a little bit of velvet for his collar, and he was just testing it for size and for quality. And of course, people thought he was quality. And two women came up to him and they thought they were conning him. He was stood outside a shop of silks and he looked like the silk merchant that he wasn't. And they were asking about the silk and what could be done for some silk and how much silk was and how much for a dress. And whether the gentleman would come and show silks at their house. And the gentleman, who they obviously thought was a silk merchant, and James Whitney, said of course he would come. I'll just rush in and get a bit. What colours are you looking for? Oh, a bit of red and a bit of navy they asked for. So James, ever the talker, went into the silk shop. Now, the ladies outside thought he was just going to pick up some pieces. No, he was doing a second con on a con. I don't know what a second con on a con is, but it's definitely a larger con than one con. So he persuaded the shopkeeper that he wanted to see some silk and he'd be back in a minute, and he was gone. And outside, the ladies, oh, they could see the silk on his arm, and one took one arm and one took the other, and they marched him back to their house. Except when they got to their house was a house of ill repute, let us say. And in exchange for the silk, they would offer services. Poor James, he knew a bargain when he had a bargain. So he took the bargain, he left no silk. But he did go round to the silk shop owner and say he had been with some ladies who seemed to have an inordinate amount of his material. And he left the address. At which point the ladies were later, yes, they were invaded by the local peelers. I don't know if they were peelers at the time. I must check that, mustn't I? I mustn't say the wrong thing at the wrong time. Were there peelers? Not till later, I think. But there were the local force who went and collected the ladies. And that is how James did a con on a con with his very smart suit, because he was well known to dress well. But you see, that would be his downfall as well, because we come to the final tale of the wonderful and beautiful James Whitney. We return to South Mimms, and after all his hijinks, and there were more than one raid on the Duke of Marlborough, it is said that through his lifetime a fortune passed through his hands. His forces went up and down as his fortunes went up and down. And sadly, he was down on his luck and back to riding with two friends and stopping somebody at the corner of the road. So James Whitney and two highwaymen were on the Wash, on that road that goes round the back to the service station. Now you go to the service station and you go to Pizza Express. You go round the side of, this is true, round this, some people don't believe me, round the side of Pizza Express, down to the bottom, and you find two pieces of metal, they're gates. And there is now a nature reserve at the back. And this is the bottom of the Wash, where it comes now under the M25. And this is where the raids were done. The darkest and gloomiest part of that track. The bit that comes out under the road, where there would have been a wood, a little forest. And one night, James and his friends were waiting there, waiting to see what would come down the pathway. And down the pathway came a man. He was a seller of fine fabrics, of lace. Lace was expensive, and a bolt of lace could fetch a fortune. So there was James, dark hat, dark mask, dark clothes, perhaps the bit of velvet round his neck, and the gun up and ready, and the immortal words were said, and those immortal words are, "Stand and deliver." And what is a merchant of lace to do but give up his goods? He may have given some money, but he gave a bolt of lace. Now James, by now not as canny as he should have been, came back to the pub at the end of our road, the White Hart, and it is said that he and his friends were sitting in the White Hart laughing at their theft of a bolt of lace. And others heard it. And the merchant went straight to the authorities. And when the authorities went to the White Hart and asked about it, there were people there who would give evidence. Now, James had been caught before, but he'd never been convicted. There was no evidence. But this time, people will stand up and say, "Oh, I heard him in the White Hart. Loud he was. He was talking about a bolt of lace. Good quality it was, and how he just snatched it off this man who came through the Wash." Can you imagine? You have defeated, really, the Duke of Marlborough, a fighter, a war hero, and you're caught for a bolt of lace. And there he was up in the Old Bailey. You can read the reports. He gets done because those people remember him. They give evidence that they can see him in court. There he is, standing there. We know him. And finally, he ends up in Newgate, in the prison. But even there, James is not defeated. No, you'd think by this stage he'd give up. No. This is when his life becomes famous. For there he is, sat in the jail. He has a floor-length, beautiful dressing gown made of silk. Exquisite, the highest fashion. He has, one of those curly wigs, you know, those white curly wigs that obviously were so fashionable, they look ridiculous. And beautiful clothes, except if you look at his right ankle, he is what you would today call tagged. He had a ball and chain round it. He had a chain round his ankle to the floor. But even there in Newgate, you see, he was elegant. And he was telling the tales of his life, how amazing he had been, how he had reached the heights and hit the lows. But he was convicted, and a highwayman, well, he would be taken to a place down the end of Oxford Street in London and on a rope. But he didn't give up. They used to put them in the cart and take them down the road, and everybody would shout and scream, either cheer or boo or throw things at them. So imagine you're in an open cart going up Oxford Street and you're going to your death. Except James, still, he was a chatter, he was a talker, he was an East End guy if ever there was one, and he persuaded his jailers that he knew of a papist plot, because it was still the time of Bonnie Prince Charlie loitering round the outskirts of the royal family. And by the time he got up to the end of Oxford Street, he persuaded them that he really did know of a plot. So they stuck him on the back of a horse and they took him back to jail to find out what the plot was. But you can only do that once. Because the next time he tried it, it didn't work. Because he really had no evidence at all. So, yet again, he was sent up that road, all the way up. And of course, being the dandy man, the highwayman, the hero that he was not going to let that position of infamy go without a last chat. So he regaled the audience before his death with his tales. He must have been amazing. I mean, he must have been such an interesting person to meet. Bad though he was. I'm not saying he was a good man. He was a bad man. But I think he was a wheeler and a dealer and a wrangler and a smooth talker. He would fit in some of the films that we have today on gangsters from the East End. But unfortunately, he met a bitter end. And he died in 1694. And that was the end of James Whitney, the dandy highwayman who plied his trade virtually on South Mimms service station, the unique and the amazing service station where many things still go on today, where things are past that I cannot speak of, but I know of. James Whitney for you. Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to finish this evening with another highway tale because it fits in with my highway tales. And this one is the Wicked Woman tale. And I think I've told this before, but I like this tale. So you've got to be ready with the stand and deliver yet again. So this is slightly different. The coach rattled up the road, that road out there, A1M, up a bit further than me, across some land called No Man's Land. Inside the carriage was an MP in his dull weeds, because he was a Puritan, with his wife and daughter, because he had been persuaded by the government that all was safe. There were no highwaymen on the road. You could go anywhere, which of course was a delusion. And suddenly, from outside, they heard the immortal words, which are, "Stand and deliver." And the carriage round to a halt. And suddenly those people inside, that'd been cosy in their own little world, were thrust out into the open. And there was the dark highwayman with the black coat, pointing the gun. No words were spoken. And soon they realised that to survive, they had to give up their money. Rings, jewellery, and a nice heavy bag. were deposited in the highwayman's hands before the gun was shot, terrifying the horses that raced off. And as the horse and carriage disappeared, the highwayman turned on the horse and raced through the woods. That highwayman raced as if the hounds of hell were after them, through the woods as fast and fast as possible, until an old house appeared. Then the highwayman slipped from the horse, and as that person slipped, the hat fell, and you would have seen, if you'd been the owl in the tree, the hair tumble down the back. For this was no man, this was a woman. And as she fell, she threw up again and again and again for the fright of what she had just done. This was a young woman who had once been the richest young heiress in the whole of the kingdom. At 8 years old, her father, her grandfather, and her younger brother had all died, and all the money that they owned came to her. But of course she couldn't have it. She was just a girl, a woman. The money would belong to her husband. So at 8, she becomes a ward of court. But it is a time of great torment. Charles I is saying, oh, I don't agree with Parliament. And Parliament is saying, we don't think you have a God-given right to dismiss us. And war is rampaging. The king has moved to Oxford, and this little girl with her mother are in Oxford. Wealthy as she is, they both need protection. So the mother marries. And of course, her new stepfather looks around for somebody to marry this child. She needs to be married off so that they can get the money. And they need the money because they are fighting for Charles I. And what he needs more than anything is the arms, the military arms. Well, it's not too bad. They don't marry her off till she's 13. And they don't marry her off to somebody old and ancient. She actually marries her stepfather's cousin, second cousin, who's 16. That's not so bad, is it? 13, 16. It's okay-ish. It could have been terrible. Anyway, I don't think there was much of a marriage because all they wanted was the money. As soon as they were married, the young man was off with his father fighting. Within months, he was imprisoned in the Tower of London. And when he got out of there, father and son disappeared across the seas. They went to Holland. This young woman was left to grow up on her own. With no money now, it had been spent. With a change of politics, she was now the opposition. And like many women of that time, they had learned to fight, to shoot when they were in Oxford, because Oxford had become a training ground. And women of both sides during that time of the Roundheads and the Royalists had learnt to fight and control men and look after land and property. But what does she do? She has no money. She has a few servants at the house. So what does she have to do? She decides to be a highwayman. That may have been terrifying that first time, but the money was worth it. And she went out a few more times. One night she went out, and as she stopped a coach, out of the coach came a man pointing a gun at her. And she panicked until a voice behind her said, "Oh no, young man. There are 2 of us here with guns. I think 2 defeats 1. Put down your gun." And she'd been found by another highwayman. She had been found. She didn't want him to know that it was a woman. So as soon as the raid was done, the money was in her hand, she turned and fled. He raced after her, not understanding. And again her hat fell off and the hair tumbled down. And this time, Ned, who it was, the other highwayman, stopped and let her escape, holding her hat. Now it is said that she and him formed a relationship. Now they may have had the relationship of fighting together on the roads, and it may have blossomed into something else. Who can blame her? She was a young woman, now nearly 20, left on her own to look after people, with no husband. He was miles away. And so she set up a fighting relationship with this young man around this area, until one night she didn't turn out. She was unwell and Ned went out on his own. That night he was shot. He was shot and killed. And when she woke up the next morning and heard the news that a highwayman had been shot, she was beside herself with anger. And so she was reckless. And the next night she went out, she took no precautions. And when she stopped a cart and two men stood up with guns, she was too slow. They hit her at the top of her leg. And although she rode away, there was no stopping the bleeding. She didn't know. And she died on the stairs that led up to her room. And the most ignominious thing about it, and why she's probably called the wicked woman, is not that she was a highwayman. It's not even that she had an illicit relationship. It's probably because she was found dead. She was found dead, dressed as a woman, which is the worst of it all, isn't it? You could be a highwaywoman, you could have a relationship, but to do all that dressed as a man is impossible. And so she goes down in local history as Catherine Ferriers, the wicked woman who died dressed as a man. How could that happen? Says the woman, very elegantly wearing her trousers, which you can't see in this outfit. But anyway, so that is my tales of highway people around South Mims, the notorious service station of the present day. And I would go on to regale you of, you know, the eco warriors who stop people at the service station, but it's a bit too long. I'll finish there.
Thank you, Sarah. You've been magnificent, as always. I will never look at Southmin's service station again, or I'll make sure I go there tooled up in future. And I like a bit of decapitation and the odd bit of blood in the story. I think it's appropriate for our children's night.
Too ghastly. It was only mild.
No. I thought it was perfect. Absolutely perfect. I think I think decapitation is some. We didn't even have a little hanging.
Hanging.
A little hanging.
Just a little bit.
Execution. So what we got next Friday? Louis, did you like all that? Oh, well, we've got the seal of approval from Mr. Louis. What's happening next Friday? We have all the way from Greece to Spinner, telling tales. Yeah, that's kept to put a smile on Louis' face.
And then the week after, we're at East Anglia.
Oh, the week afterwards, yes. So not this Sunday, but next Sunday is Sunday week. That is, will be our worldwide story round at 6 o'clock, and the following Friday, whatever it is, the 17th or something, is it?
Yeah, that's the.
I haven't got the diary in front of me in this hotel for
17th is
17th. We've got where there'll be several of us from the East Anglian Storytelling Festival. Meanwhile, thank you very much. Big round of applause for Sarah Lloyd Winder.
Thank you, lovely audience. You're so nice.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, John.
I like the red gloves dispenser.
She's doing the washing up, is she?
Yeah. Yes. A pair of marigolds.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Thank you as always, Waleed, for flying the magic carpet, and all those who came on live.
Thank
Thanks
you.
very much. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Sean. Bye,
Bye.
Sarah.
Bye. Thank you, Louis.